All right, so here we are with Pedro Moura, who is a national baseball writer for Fox Sports, of course. And so today, as my first question for you would be, would you provide a brief summary of your current role and primary responsibilities as a national baseball writer for Fox Sports?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks, Amari, for having me. As a national baseball writer, my role is to write about players and teams across the continent, really, mostly in America, but the including the Toronto Blue Jays as well. So when teams come into Los Angeles and Anaheim during the season, I visit with them, try to find interesting stories that each team is has within its roster or overall overarching stories. And so you spend a little bit of time with a lot of people over the season from April to October, and a little more now at this time of year in spring training in Arizona and a little bit in Florida too, and then the playoffs through October. You go wherever the winning teams are, and so it's a fun a bit of unpredictable, maybe I would say, job in some ways. I came from being a baseball beat writer before, so pretty much is a similar job, but exclusively focused to one team, which is a traditional way to come up within this industry. As you start that way. I started first as a backup baseball writer, so I was just learning the ropes from people who did the beat writer job, and then after 3 years of that, I found an opportunity and traveled the country. First shadowing the Angels and then the Dodgers. And after a few years of that, I earned this role and have been doing it now for 2 years.
Wow, that is great. That's great right there. You carry this whole baseball writing for a minute, so you're not new to
Yeah.
it.
No,
You're
no.
pretty true to it.
Yes,
So
yes.
that kind of leads me into my next question. You obviously just spoke on how you've been surrounded with sports pretty much this whole time as you started as a beat writer, and now you're going through with being a baseball writer nationally now. So what key lessons have you learned working within sports?
Um, a lot. I mean, most of the people who do this professionally, I would say, grew up obsessed with sports. And I'm certainly one of them. I would say, one of the first and most important lessons I learned is that your relationship to sports on a personal level will change. You will not be as obsessed, as much of a fan as you once were when you're working within it. It's simply impossible. I know very few people who've retained the same sense of fandom that they had when they started. It just becomes, Dodger Stadium was when I was a kid was my favorite place in the whole world. We go a couple times a year driving from the suburbs. I would cry when we walked in, and like the turning that your place to your workplace where you have to come 130 times a year at times. It's just not going to have the same relationship. You still try to remind yourself that you're very lucky to be doing something that you loved so much as a kid, and you still appreciate it in new ways, but it's not going to be the same thing. So I would say that's one lesson. You have to be prepared to have your relationship with the sport you're covering, or all sports, change. People ask, they assume, and often people assume that because you work in sports, you're obsessed with every sport, that you have your favorite team and everything. And in most cases, I would say that's not the case. People, we marvel at the athletes, we enjoy the competition, but we don't root as much for individual teams. We root for ourselves in this, which is, people ask what that means. It's like, if I'm writing a story about a player, and that player, I want that player to continue basically doing what I'm writing about, where he's succeeding or struggling to make. Basically, you want the story to be as powerful, as potent as possible. So you root for your own outcomes. When you're covering a game and you're up against a tight deadline, you root for the game to end as soon as possible. You don't root for a crazy comeback necessarily, because that's going to push against your deadline. You end up rooting for yourself at all costs. It's a funny thing. So all that changes your relationship. There's a lot of other lessons. I mean, I think another thing I've learned is that this is fundamentally, for a lot of people, a really big source of entertainment. And you have to remember that you're working in an entertainment industry. It's not that different than the entertainment industry at large. I went to college with a lot of people who then pursued entertainment journalism and whatnot. And I'm not sure that, I don't really know why they're not actually the same category in some ways. We are working in a diversion business, right? This is not fundamentally that important to society, but it provides joy to people. And you know, through these joyous endeavors, there are lessons to be told and learned about broader society. But the actual games themselves, you know, aren't that important. You end up, you know, you have to remind yourself of that too, like that this is not the you know, this is not, I'm not covering something of actual international significance like other people I went to journalism school with, you know, do professionally. And so there's strengths and weaknesses to that. You know, it's a little bit more freeing. You know, you can turn it off at the end of a day, maybe a little easier than you can if you're covering, you know, the migrant labor crisis or something like that. You know, being in baseball writing. Although when you're covering the World Series, it is, you know, it is pretty hard to wind down at the end of the night because it's a buzzy environment. And so I've learned to kind of lean into the entertainment aspect of the industry, which I didn't quite grasp when I started, I would say.
Right. I love that. I love that. Love that. And so, you know, as we keep bringing it up with, like, as you've talked, you brought it up several times with the different things you've experienced, different things you've been, and all that comes with, you know, the job. And so if you could, what are some highlight points you had, maybe 1 to 2 highlights you had since, you know, working within your sport career and working as a national, you know, baseball writer? What are some highlights you've had? I know you have a lot on your mind. Maybe it could have been, you know, something big, something small, but something that was a highlight for you.
Yeah, there's quite a few. I mean, trying to pick one or two, I would say there's something there's a reporter's high that I've described with friends, and I'd say I'd describe it this way: when you think of a story idea that you think could be interesting, and you start to ask questions about it to the people, the subjects of the story, and you know you're often met with resistance, or it's hard to get the person you want to talk to, and you face a lot of you know, small barriers. And then but when you hear in an interview, within an interview, you hear an answer that is starting to unlock the story that you want to tell. The moment where you hear that, and you can, and there's almost this this automatic uh system going into place in your brain where you're starting to imagine how the story is going to unfold from there. The way that feels when somebody tells you something that you suspected or wanted to hear and weren't, or were questioning whether you'd be able to get on the record in an interview. When you have that start to happen, it's addictive. I mean, that thing that fuels you for days to come as you're telling the story, as you're researching it and editing and all that. And the moments in my career where where that happened in a way where I doubted it could, those stick with you for, you know, for years. I mean, I still remember them when you start to learn how to really conduct interviews in the best way. You know, what I tell people this about sports writing: you have to we study our own tape, you know, kind of just like athletes do, but we have to do that. Like it's a requirement because that's how the interviews are, right? You're transcribing your own interview. So you have to study your own tape. You have to hear all the times you messed up in a question. You have to learn all that you have to learn from all the times where you interrupted a quiet moment where someone was considering revealing something to you, and you got awkward about the silence, and so you started to say something instead, and you have to confront all of those. And so the times where you build from that, and then you learn how to like make a person feel comfortable to reveal something about their lives to you in an interview is those are the highlights for me in the career. I think a lot of people in my position would say, you know, covering World Series, covering, you know, no hitters, that sort of thing is the pinnacle. For me, it's the human aspect of understanding, you know, after years of practice, learning how to, you know, create the optimal interview environment, and where somebody is comfortable talking to you, and you're learning things that you really couldn't even imagine knowing, you know, and having someone open up to you. Those in my career are my highlights.
Yes, and I would have to second that. I would definitely say, you know, the growth is always a highlight. Being able to see where you were wrong and being able to, you know,
Yeah.
correct that and make it better, because there's always room for improvement. So I definitely have to second that. And you also dropped some gems just then. So, you know, to kind of close it out and, you know, even to feed into that question, what advice would you offer to people who are college graduates looking to get within sports, high school graduates who are going into college, looking at pursuing that career, and just what would you leave them with?
Yeah, I would say practice as much as you can. I feel really lucky that early on in my, I pursued this from when I was 14, 15, and I listened to people who told me, you need to get reps, and started interning in my local paper in high school, and practicing there, and then in college, and you look back on what I wrote then, and it's bad, it's very bad, but I was getting better. It is it's on the topic of the growth you're talking about. It's really nice to do so in an atmosphere. You want to get your bad reps out of the way before there's a bigger spotlight on your work, and the only way you're not going to improve by only by just waiting and wanting to get a job in this industry. You have to try. You have to do it. The unfortunate thing is I understand it can be difficult to get paid internships and whatnot, and so I empathize with that for sure. But I would say anything you can do to find a way to really make to make your mistakes at a low stakes environment, and make a little bit of money ideally, and fight your way up. The other thing you can do, if it doesn't make sense to if you cannot find an opportunity that is allowing you to get those reps, I would say you can replicate some of that by just reading a lot of work, or doing whatever it is you want to do in the industry. If you want to become a broadcaster, watch a lot of, the broadcasters on YouTube, on television itself. Watch them and how they do their daily work. I think when I started as a baseball writer, it was really nice to be able to go back to, in moments of stress, when I didn't know what to write or whatnot, I thought about all the articles I'd read in my life, being obsessed with baseball my entire life, and was able to kind of replicate little things I had read and learn from that. And I think you will find that if you can commit to learning the craft, even if it's just indirectly observing the craft, I think that'll come through in your work. So I would say get reps however you can. I understand it's not always feasible for somebody to get a low paying or unpaid internship in college or after college. And if that can't work for you, get those reps in some other way if you're serious about this. Yeah, that would be my advice.
Great. That is great. That's some great advice. I'm even going to take that for myself. It was very well needed. So, Mr. Moura, I guess, thank you so much for taking the time today to do this very brief interview with us today, and just, spreading the wealth over to people who want to be in the same position that you're in today.
Thank you, Maury. Appreciate your time.
Of course. Thank you.